The uneasy dance between Canadian politics and U.S. influence took a dramatic turn this week when former U.S. President Donald Trump issued blunt remarks about Canada's upcoming federal election. In a Fox News interview, Trump openly disparaged Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, labeling him, "stupidly no friend of mine," and mused that a Liberal government under Prime Minister Mark Carney would be easier for Washington to deal with. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. It was a stunning intervention, but hardly surprising for those who have watched Trump's unpredictable forays into foreign politics. For Canadians, however, the timing and tone of his words couldn't be more consequential. An election is looming, party lines are sharpening, and Trump's statements have added fuel to an already charged political atmosphere. During his Fox News sit-down with host Laura Ingraham, Trump recycled some of his most infamous talking points about Canada. He described the country as meant to be America's 51st state, complaining that Ottawa has been one of the nastiest countries to deal with. Trump once again pushed his false narrative that the U.S. subsidizes Canada to the tune of $200 billion a year, despite decades of economists pointing out that trade between the two countries is balanced and mutually beneficial. He framed Canada as a constant irritant in negotiations and accused the government of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of duplicity during the tariff wars of his presidency. It was classic Trump, grievance-driven, blunt, and heavy with exaggeration. Yet this time, he attached a pointed political conclusion: he would prefer dealing with a Liberal Prime Minister rather than a Conservative one. For Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader who has spent months trying to frame himself as a strong defender of Canadian sovereignty, Trump's remarks presented both a challenge and an opportunity. At a Sudbury news conference the next day, Poilievre shot back. "It's obvious President Trump wants the Liberals in power," he said. "Why? Because the Liberals will keep Canada weak. They will bend to American demands. They will allow this country to become dependent. Canadians don't need weakness. They need strength." Poilievre doubled down on his nationalist message, insisting that only his leadership could make Canada self-reliant and able to stand on its own 2 feet. By linking Trump's preference for Carney with a narrative of Canadian weakness, Poilievre attempted to reframe the criticism as a badge of honor. If Trump wants Canada docile, Poilievre implied, then Trump's rejection only proves that a Conservative government would be strong. Trump's dismissal is striking in part because it represents a reversal. As recently as January, Trump had praised Poilievre as more aligned with him than Trudeau and declared that a Conservative victory would be very good. At that time, he spoke warmly of Poilievre's skepticism toward international institutions and his critical stance on Canadian media. But Trump has never been consistent in his international alliances. Just last month, he distanced himself again, stating that Poilievre was not a MAGA guy, a phrase meant to highlight ideological differences with his own Make America Great Again movement. For Poilievre, Trump's fickleness presents a political dilemma. Liberals are eager to tie him to Trump's populism, running advertisements that splice together their soundbites in an effort to paint the Conservative leader as Canada's version of Trump. But when Trump attacks Poilievre, that narrative becomes harder to sustain. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his Liberal team have already identified Trump as a useful foil. Their campaign ads last month paired Trump's derision of American institutions with Poilievre's attacks on Canadian ones, suggesting the two leaders are cut from the same cloth. Trump's latest remarks complicate but don't entirely derail that strategy. Liberals now argue that Trump's disdain proves Poilievre lacks the diplomatic skills needed to manage Canada-US relations. If even Trump, known for favoring hardline leaders, doesn't trust him, they suggest Canadians should think twice. Jonathan Wilkinson, the Liberal energy minister, shrugged off Trump's comments but used them to highlight what he sees as the contrast in leadership. "Canadians are going to have a choice," Wilkinson said. "On one hand, you have someone who guided Canada through the last recession and steered Britain through Brexit. On the other, you have someone who has never worked a day in the private sector." By invoking Carney's track record as a central banker, Liberals are trying to contrast competence with inexperience, positioning themselves as the steady hand against Poilievre's combative populism. Trump's words reverberate in Canada not simply because of their bluntness, but because U.S. presidents, current or former, wield enormous influence over Canadian politics. Canada's economy is deeply intertwined with the U.S., with 3/4 of its exports heading south of the border. Trade disputes, tariffs, and political alliances can significantly alter Canada's economic landscape. During Trump's presidency, the relationship between Washington and Ottawa grew strained. His imposition of tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, his frequent clashes with Trudeau, and his dismissal of NAFTA, later renegotiated as USMCA, left many Canadians wary of his style. Yet some admired his America First posture, seeing it as a model for a tougher Canadian stance. This history explains why Trump's latest comments have such political weight. They touch not only on questions of personality but also on how Canada should define its sovereignty and independence in relation to its powerful neighbor. The political fallout from Trump's intervention is still unfolding. For Poilievre, the task will be to maintain his nationalist message without appearing rattled. His strategy of presenting himself as the leader who can make Canada strong may gain traction among voters who bristle at the idea of Trump dictating Canadian choices. For the Liberals, the challenge is to continue weaponizing Trump without losing coherence. If Trump dismisses Poilievre, can they still portray him as Canada's Trump? Or will they shift to portraying him as weak and internationally isolated? Meanwhile, Trump's remarks underscore how Canadian politics remains vulnerable to U.S. influence. Even out of office, Trump dominates headlines north of the border. His words can shift narratives, disrupt strategies, and force Canadian leaders to respond. Trump's latest comments show once again that Canada cannot insulate itself from American politics, no matter how hard it tries. By calling Poilievre no friend of mine, and suggesting that Liberals are easier to deal with, he has placed himself squarely in Canada's election story. For voters, the question may not be whether they agree with Trump but whether they want a prime minister who stands up to him, or one who works around him. For politicians, the challenge is clear. Trump is once again a character in Canada's national drama, and neither Poilievre nor Carney can ignore him. Pierre Poilievre's rise has often drawn comparisons to Trump. Both men rail against elites, attack the media, and position themselves as champions of ordinary citizens. Both thrive on sharp soundbites, aggressive debate tactics, and relentless campaigning. Yet the comparison has limits. Poilievre has built his career inside Canada's parliamentary system, serving as an MP since 2004. His style, while combative, is rooted in Canada's political traditions of sharp questioning and procedural battles. Unlike Trump, Poilievre presents himself as disciplined, policy-focused, and deeply versed in economic arguments. When Trump said last month that Poilievre was not a MAGA guy, many Canadian observers nodded in agreement. Poilievre is not a revolutionary outsider, he is a career politician who has mastered the system from within. His populism is real but tailored to Canadian sensibilities, more about housing affordability and tax fairness than about culture wars. That distinction helps explain why Poilievre has been quick to distance himself from Trump's label, even when Trump's base might seem a natural constituency. Standing opposite Poilievre is Mark Carney, the Liberal leader and sitting Prime Minister. Carney's career trajectory could hardly be more different. A former governor of the Bank of Canada and later the Bank of England, Carney built his reputation as one of the world's most respected central bankers. He steered Canada through the 2008 financial crisis and later played a pivotal role in guiding Britain during the turbulence of Brexit. Internationally, he is known as a steady hand, a globalist, and an advocate for climate finance. Carney entered politics only recently, but Liberals have leveraged his reputation for competence and credibility. They frame him as the grown-up in the room, the leader with the global stature to stand toe-to-toe with Washington and other capitals. For Trump, such a figure may well seem preferable, pragmatic, less combative, and focused on economic stability. That, ironically, could explain why Trump finds Liberals easier to deal with. The Liberals have long tried to paint Poilievre as Canada's Trump. They aired ads last month that spliced together footage of Trump denouncing U.S. institutions with Poilievre criticizing Canadian ones, suggesting ideological kinship. Yet Trump's latest comments complicate the narrative. If Trump himself dismisses Poilievre, can Liberals still credibly argue he is Canada's Trump? The answer may lie in reframing. Liberals can now argue that Poilievre is not only reckless at home but incompetent abroad. If even Trump finds him untrustworthy, they suggest, how can he manage Canada's most important